Dr. Sharon Spano, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Jason. I'm excited to be here and have a conversation with you today.
And I am very excited to have a conversation on one of my favorite topics. It's kind of the deeper meanings of productivity and kind of finding meaning and performance. And a lot of the things that doing the research on your work that I really liked is that you go beyond some of the kind of surface level tools, tactics that kind of try to, we see so much of people trying to put all these things into a universal box to fit everyone without kind of going a step deeper. And one of the things that really struck me was that, and I've got it written right here. You talk a lot about how high performers who have everything but still feel stuck or empty. That was one of the topics I really that resonated with me. So I definitely want to dive into that. But before we even get started on some of these very specific topics, tell us a little bit about your background, your work, and how you came to basically make your life's work human performance that and leadership and some of the tactics that you talk about.
Yeah, it's a long story, but I think, even when I was young, I was always interested in potential. I just didn't realize it. I thought when I was younger, I might be a psychologist or something, then realized I didn't want to sit in a room all day doing that. So the work evolved over time, of course, as most things do. But I think when my son was born with a very rare metabolic disorder. And that catapulted me into the disability arena as an advocate. And that was really, kind of really just a happenstance kind of thing that I found myself speaking around the country on behalf of families and persons with disabilities. And that one thing led to another. So initially, I was interested in performance, trying to help people with disabilities like my own son, be integrated and fit into society and ultimately find work, as they matured and whatnot. But along the way, the speaking career came up, the consulting career morphed out of that. I found myself in and out of Fortune 500 companies all around North America. Got really interested in leadership development and high performers and what makes them tick. And then later, when I got my doctorate, my work centered around really adult human development. And I started really looking at how the stages, as we call them, of development impact not only our perspective on the world, but our capacity for performance, and certainly our experience of time and money, which is why I wrote the book, The Pursuit of Time and Money. So that's sort of the very short, quick, down and dirty version of it. But I like to say, my son, so much of my career changed as a result of my son. And then my son passed away in 2008. And the work has just continued to morph and grow because I had to do a lot of human development work on myself to move through that grieving process, as you might imagine. And then it opened really up a door for me, Jason, for greater understanding and empathy that has really deeply impacted the way I coach high level leaders and my understanding of what they go through and how they come to be wherever they are. When they get to me, they're usually wanting something more, better, different in their lives. And I feel like, between the training and the lived experience, those combinations, I think, have given me a different perspective on many, many things that I may not have had otherwise.
Well, I want to first and foremost say that I'm so sorry that you had to endure that tragedy. At the same time, I want to say how admirable it is. I'm always fascinated, as well as I just find such heroism in people that are able to take those tragedies and setbacks and just absolute devastating elements of life and take, as the Bible says, like the Lord takes beauty for ashes. And so for you to be able to do that very thing in a very real way, I just want to tell you that's amazing, and it's and it makes it even more of an honor to get to share this time with you.
Well, thank you so much for that. I hope that it will inspire other people out there, no matter what they're up against, because it's become a big part of my work is really helping people. My work is now even deeper in that I got a lot of certifications, and my work is very trauma informed. And again, the lived experience plus the training and the developmental work has helped me be with leaders in a way that is beyond just the performance issues and the tactics and the things that, I did it earlier in my career, but I just kept running into high level, CEOs and individuals in the C-suite who were troubled and dealing with a lot of other things. So, you realize you need more training yourself sometimes to understand and be what you need to be for them. And so it's just been an enriching, many years of a journey that, and in a big part, came out of the experience of my own son and my own loss.
You saying that, talking about the leaders in the C-suite and these seemingly just high performers that have it all, you remind me of a fictional scene from the show Mad Men, in which Peggy, who is at the time still, I think she's still Don Draper's secretary. And of course, you see through, for those of you who have seen Mad Men, even if you haven't, Don Draper is this probably one of the most well written characters for television ever.
Mm.
And, he's this uber high performer.
Like Scotty, yeah.
Yeah, right. I mean, just, he's so complex. And he's incredibly talented. And Peggy says to him one time, whenever, I think it was after maybe he and Betty were about to have Bobby, their second child. And Peggy looks at Don and says, "You have everything and you have so much of it." And
Mhm.
Don replies, like I think so many of your clients probably could reply. He looks at her with this kind of almost dismayed look on his face and he says, "It must seem that way."
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I think that kind of leads into that first little kind of tee up I mentioned before, which is how one of the things that in your work you discuss is that a lot of the performers, these high performers that seemingly have not only everything but so much of it, they would probably reply that same way and say, "Yeah, it must seem that way." But there's still an emptiness, and that's one of the things that I've dealt with it in my life. It's almost like once you achieve whatever that proverbial metaphoric brass ring is, then there seems to be this emptiness, which I know for me, one of the ways I've dealt with it is now I try my best to enjoy the journey, enjoy the work, enjoy the hardship,
Mhm.
getting there more than what I once did, instead of just trying to get that out of the way and get to the thing, whatever that proverbial, mountaintop is. What is it beneath the surface that you've discovered that a lot of the high performers, a lot of which are probably listening to this show, they're sitting there going,
Mhm.
I've got the money, I've got the cars, I've got the house, I've got
Right.
the things, which the things just really are empty. But what's below the surface that you found that is causing that void for a lot of the high performers you work with?
Well, it's such a question, a deep question. It's obviously complex and different for each individual. But I think if I try to pare it down to some major themes, one of the things that I realized that was very fascinating to me as I began to work more and more with leaders and deeper with them, because initially, remember, it was leadership development, but then I found they would be coming to me with all this other stuff that was going on, and often they couldn't really name what was going on. I would get phrases like, there's just something missing, or I'm having trouble connecting with my kids or my wife or my, husband or whatever. As we would get deeper into the work, there are a couple things that showed up for me. One was there was almost always some level of trauma in the background. And I use trauma loosely, capital T, lowercase t, because it's all relevant. If I'm a 4-year-old and my parents get a divorce and I don't see my dad, I've had that many, many times where I didn't see my dad for years and years. That's very traumatic, particularly to a young boy, to anything from incest. I mean, the really intense things, right? But what I found that was fascinating, Jason, was I think typically in society, at least for me, I thought people who had experienced trauma, maybe didn't have the ability to excel and succeed in the ways that we typically think of. What I came to understand was that while that may be true, there's also another element of individuals who are actually catapulted, energized, if you will, to become successful as a result of the trauma. Usually there's someone in the background that was that support for them, whether it was a teacher or a coach or, maybe a grandmother or a single mom. I see that a lot. Dad wasn't in the picture for whatever reason, but, this gentleman had a single mom and, she worked really hard on his behalf and inspired him to be his biggest, highest self. But then, down the road, see, when I get all the toys and what I think success is, that's where the emptiness of success, as I've come to call it, starts to show up. And then when I start working with them, it's usually pretty clear to me fairly quickly that there's a deeper level of work that we can get into, and he deserves or she deserves to maybe explore. So that and the systems work that I do, and I do some very specific things around looking at the individual systems as well as the organizational systems. We can do that level of work, and as we like to say in systems work, look at it in such a way that we can put those issues to rest, so that something new, bigger, better can emerge and come into play. It's very exciting work, but it's a lot sometimes for both them and me, because you have to hold space for whatever's showing up. But it's very gratifying when you see an individual just really step into another level of meaning, purpose, that aligns with the success. So it's not like we have to give up one for the other, but that we learn to hold space for both.
I think that that really lands with me in a couple of ways. Not the least of which is I grew up under some kind of weird circumstances. I never like to dwell on my childhood, but I had, my parents divorced when I was 4, and my biological mother, she, you know, was into a lot of abusive substances, and it was just kind of ugly. And then my dad was the complete opposite. He was like this strong, straight-laced pillar of the community. And I literally had this really, now as I'm older, I'm 51 years old, and I look back and I go, it was really a really cool dynamic, because for a while before I went to live with my dad all the time, I would go from one side of the tracks to the other side of the
Mhm.
tracks. I mean, two
Yeah.
opposite ends of town. One where I had, the land, the property that my father was living in, that had been in our family for 100 years. I had a street named after me, to this other side of town where my friends were the kids that got the subsidized lunches, and it was weird. And now I look at it, it was great. And I remember it was weird whenever I was really young. I would have adults that would come up to me and they would say, it's just so good you turned out the way you did, and I'd be like, well, how else was I supposed to turn out? I mean, what, there's just decisions to be made. So to me, I think I gave myself too much credit. I was a kid, by the way, I'm a child of the 80s. So when Nancy Reagan's Just Say No campaign was the big thing, to me, I remember as a kid thinking, well, I'm never going to do drugs, because if they're making this big a deal out of it, it must be really
Mhm.
bad. So I'm just going to say no. I mean, I was that kid that was naive enough to actually buy
Wow,
into the
okay.
campaign. you know? But really, as I look back on it, I did have my father who, while we've had a very strained relationship throughout our lives, I at least had him to look to as kind of a model of better behavior than that of my mom, and something to aspire to. And so for the most of my life, it was trying to live up to my dad's standard, just make my dad proud. And in a lot of
Mhm.
ways, earn my father's love. It was a very conditionally loving environment that I grew up under. So I wanted to meet those conditions. I had kind of this performance mentality paired with this conditional love household. So I wanted to
Mhm.
meet the conditions. And I look back on that, and that has shaped so much of how I
Correct.
have done a lot of things, as a father, and to try to overcome some of that. And one of the things that I love that you talk about that I don't think many people really touch on. Now, they may say that, well, like if I listen to a Jamie Dimon interview, he's always going to talk about his dad being in finance and how it kind of molded
Mhm.
his, career path. But how we actually lead and run companies, I think people take for granted, and I know that your work, you've uncovered a lot of this, how much we exercise that leadership and how we try to run a company is in a lot of ways shaped by that household we grew up in and some of the things we saw as a child. So talk a little bit about how leaders can identify some of the things that they might be trying to overcome, that
Yeah.
they first might need to go back to explore some things that are beyond kind of the workplace.
That's such a well, first, let me thank you so much for being so transparent. And one of the things that you said at the opening that I hear so much, and I think it's true for all of us as high achievers, myself included, is I never dwell much on my childhood. And I think and I haven't if we could unlock that key, it would be an amazing thing, because my sister, for example, and I guess maybe I have unlocked the key to some degree in that we were also from divorced parents, and we were taken from our mother to live with my paternal grandmother. My sister was too young to be separated from a mother. I know this now from a developmental perspective. I being 4 years older, I just adapted and did my best, and I became that high achiever, wanting to please my grandmother, A's in school. I went to Catholic school and the whole thing, where she just took a lot of wrong turns and has a very, very different life from my own. It's very sad. Um, so maybe age has something to do with those trajectories. I'm not really sure, but I do know that high achievers always say we don't dwell on the childhood. Like I had a friend, a colleague a couple of years ago, who's a psychoanalyst, and when he heard about my childhood, he kept wanting to talk about the trauma in my life, and I said, I don't know how to tell you this, but I didn't think of it as trauma. I mean, I grew up in the inner cities of LA, and we were very poor, and it was not a. I look back now and think, wow, that was not the best thing. But, when you're a kid, you're just living your life. And I was too busy achieving, just like you're saying, it informs, whatever happens to us as a kid at whatever point in time, it informs how we start to move forward and we make choices and decisions. So, to your question, if I can reframe, I think you were asking me, what are some of the things that I see in these high achievers, right? Often, as I said earlier, they don't necessarily know specifically what it is that's triggering that sense of emptiness, unless it's a really, really big thing that's, come upon them, like loss of a business or, severe, loss of income or divorce or whatnot. Most of the time, it's more subtle kinds of things that are showing up, that uneasiness or restlessness. And I attach all of that. And I think this is really important. I want to stress this because a lot of times that sensation, that feeling of something's not right or emptiness does need to be addressed at deeper levels. But many times people are literally just growing up and into what we call a different stage of development. So I always say that roughly 68% of the American workforce, as an example, lands at stage 4, 5, maybe 6. There's 12 stages that we know of based on the research. So if you're going along and you've checked off all the boxes for achievement and success, and now you're wanting something more, it's not always true that something is missing. It could be that you're just growing up, as I said a moment ago, into another stage of development. And it can feel very much like an identity crisis. Like, I don't know who I am anymore because the cars and the house aren't doing it for me like they used to. The bank account isn't doing it for me. But what's really happening is that I am shifting, my consciousness is changing to a point where I now want something more meaningful. Maybe it's something more spiritual in my life. I want to contribute. Usually when people get into the later stages, they're more philanthropic. They're looking at, global issues, not just, my own front yard, my own pool, my own house kind of thing. They're wanting to have an impact. They're wanting their life to have more meaning. And unfortunately, it doesn't really have anything to do with age. The stages of development are not correlated with age, except for in the very early years, of course. But as we get older, many people, and it's often because of trauma, get stuck at that stage of achiever. And there's nothing wrong with that. You can have a very robust experience of life at any stage. But if there's something that hasn't been addressed in the earlier stages, like a level of trauma, it will continue to show up in more vigorous ways. And then that's often where people feel that restlessness, as I said, or tension or angst or, that emptiness. Did I answer that? Because I said a lot. I don't know if I really answered it.
For sure. No, I think you absolutely did. And that's one of the things I want to talk about is the stages of development, because it's one of the things that I don't like to think that I do a lot of navel gazing, but at the same time, I do try to explore my own life to try to figure out answers to why I do the things I do and how I can correct those that I don't do very well.
Yeah.
So and I know that, and there's something really almost magical about, like, when I turned 40, I used to say, when I turned 40, my I don't give a bleep meter just went through the roof. I just all of a sudden, and I think that
Mhm.
was really kind of like a crass way of saying I was just becoming more comfortable with who I was. Stop trying to prove who I am. This is who I am, warts and all. and I'm okay with it. Not that I'm going to accept just the negative. I'm going to try to still fix it, but I'm also not going to try to hide it anymore. Just it's who I am. Then you turn 50 and it takes a whole new level. I mean, I find so much more just comfort, relaxation, and not trying to, I don't know, be so identified by what I do, but more, not that I really care about being identified by this, but I'm just more focused on how I live, the things that take up my time, like this podcast, like we talked about before I
Really.
started recording. Having two podcasts that they're not my life, they're just that they're my creative outlet. They're a way
Mhm.
to get to meet people like you that I otherwise would not, and so it feeds something in me to my constant life of discovery and learning and
Mhm.
trying to improve, and that's gotten a lot better. As it relates to leadership, though, I often wonder kind of where I am. Sometimes I feel like I'm a square peg in a round hole. Like, for
Mhm.
example, I've done all of these things that have prepared me to take on massive leadership roles in one category, but then I'll find myself in these roles where I'm completely misaligned. I'm having to follow leaders that are completely inept by any metric that
Mhm.
and so I'm having to exercise some of my leadership, my humility to figure out how do I deal with this person. And in other cases, I'm at the CEO level where I'm making all the
Yeah.
decisions. So I've got this weird dichotomy going on. So that you talk about, you said a lot. Now I've said a lot. Here's where I want to land this. How do I get a sense of what level of development I'm currently in? And what if I'm trying to lead from the wrong place? How do I move
Yeah.
to where I need to be to match
Right.
the leadership roles that I fill?
Yeah, it's a complex question because there's many things going on there. I would suggest to you. One is, the environments that we're in. I hear this a lot. People are feeling frustrated because if you let me just and then I'll answer the question. But I think we have to recognize that um, corporate America, as it is not what it used to be, and that people didn't are no longer coming up the ladder of success and being trained. We've now got and have had for what 15, maybe even 20 years. People starting up companies. Venture capital money. We're throwing the spaghetti against the wall. We're trying this platform, that platform. If it doesn't work, we shut it down. But what that has meant is that we have a lot of people in leadership roles who really have never been trained to run a company or be in those roles like the old days, I'll say.
Mhm.
And so you have young people in management, and I hear this a lot, who will say, well, my boss doesn't even talk to me. I was hired to do XYZ, but no one has even told me what XYZ is. I've had no training. I hear this constantly. And so it's really an interesting field out there right now that people are being forced to play in. And then if you're at a more mature level of understanding and with experience such as yourself, I mean, that's even a more complicated place to be, because you may have people younger than you that you're having to work with, as you suggested, that don't have the level of expertise that you yourself has. So that's, to me, the environmental issue. To your question of the stages, um, I don't know that it's so important to know what stage you're at as it is. And if anyone is interested, because there are 12 and the assessments are very, very complicated and expensive. But what we did, just as an aside, and it's for my company, is I took because my PhD is in this work, and we created a simpler quiz, if you will, that's on my website. It's called the Leader's Edge. And it's easy. You can take it in a few minutes and gives you some insight into. We focused only on the 6 stages that we know are in the workforce. Obviously, the earlier stages, birth to adolescence, are not relevant. And the later stages, we only have like maybe 1 to 5% of the population that fall in those anyway. Most of them are not in the workforce. So how do you know? I think from a systems perspective, what I teach and want my leaders to understand is to focus less on the players and more on the patterns in the system, because the system is alive. Whatever multiple systems you're in, they're all alive. They're an entity in and of themselves, whether it's, multiple companies that you're involved in, or committees. They're all system. Everything is a system, right? Your family system. And there's patterns that emerge in these systems, and it's all research-based information that we now have. And so when we look at the patterns of the system, because the system never lies, we can see things from a better perspective than if we're looking at it at a personal level of me versus you or us versus them. And then when you start to learn, like one of my clients said to me, it was like he felt like I gave him a third eye once he learned to think of things in this way and look at things in this way. You actually feel empowered to impact the systems in better ways, but you also start to see where you fit and where you don't fit. And there's basic principles around all of this that I teach, but it helps people start to understand because I always say ego is very expensive. So I don't know about you, but I've been in a lot of systems because somebody told me, oh, it has to be you. We need you to be president, or we need you to head up the committee, or we need you to be whatever. And then you're there going, what the heck? Why did I ever take this on and get involved in this? So I pay very close attention to the patterns of the system. I teach my clients to do that, excuse me, and then to really ask the deeper questions around, what is meaningful to me and where do I want to be and where am I being valued and respected the most? Because sometimes we just get stuck on a track, based on the salary, or sometimes the salary's not even there. And we stay because we're afraid to try something different. And then our hearts are just aching for that next experience. And so I don't know if that answers it, but because it's complicated, but people want to get to the next stage. And that's an achiever question when people say to me, well, how do I get to the next stage? The next stage will come when it comes, as long as you're doing the work and looking at what matters and what is most important to me in my life. Then you naturally start to evolve. Like I never would have thought I'm very later stage now. And that only came because of the grieving process and what I went through. I wasn't looking for it. I wasn't trying to become something different. And it's important to recognize that one stage is not better than the other. They're just different. You're not more, it's because it's not based on IQ or personality or anything. It's based on consciousness and your experience and your worldview and understanding.
I think that it makes so much sense. I can give you and I like to, I'm a big analogy guy. That's how I help understand things. I paint a very simple picture for my small East Texas brain. But like what it reminds me of, so I was a part of a team of would-be executives that worked for Bob Nardelli, who was the very first outside CEO Home Depot had ever hired. Now, if you know anything about the early days of the Home Depot under the leadership of Bernie Marcus and Arthur Blank, the system was very, very merit-based, very entrepreneurial, very just kind of renegade, go rogue. One of my favorite stories that was ever told about Home Depot whenever I was there was, so Walmart, to test out their enterprise-wide communication system, they took a directive from Bentonville, Arkansas, and said, we want a star, and they gave the dimensions of the star, a blue star of whatever dimensions in the far right-hand corner of every store within a certain time frame. And then they went back to measure the compliance, and it was off the charts. It was incredible because they were such an operational machine at that time. Well, they took the exact same approach, or did that exact same experiment at Home Depot. And in some stores, you would have this giant star in the middle of the store because the store manager thought, oh, well, they want it in the far right and they want it this size. I'm going to make mine that much bigger. Some of them, you would have it tiny in the wrong side. The compliance was horrible. Here was the point. The system that had been put in place with Home Depot was very much a DIY. It's kind of funny, a do-it-yourself entrepreneurial startup kind of go culture. That was the system. Well, then you bring in an engineer mindset from General Electric and trying to implement Six Sigma into that environment of Bob Nardelli, and it was a collision. I mean, it was just this, it was a guy bringing tactics, to your point, which I'd like to kind of double click on that a little bit, tactics from a manufacturing engineering environment and pressing it into a very upstart entrepreneurial system, and it was just a mess. It was an absolute mess. Those of us who worked for Nardelli, we would go around to these stores and talk to these store managers. A lot of them that had started out pushing carts in the parking lot were now running a store, which at the time on average was a $55 million a year top line business. They were multimillionaires from stock options. And they're like, wait, you're wanting me to Six Sigma? What? Are you kidding me? No, this is the way we've always done it. We've always made a lot of money. No, stop bothering me. It was a collision. And so I think that, am I kind of understanding that that's an example of taking a tactic, Six Sigma, and
Mhm.
improvement, performance in a system where it's just before you can use that tactic in that system, you got to change the system that
Right.
makes space for Six Sigma and that tactic. Am I getting it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, on an organizational level, you're absolutely right. Like I just recently had this conversation with the client because and this is so common. I'm sure you're aware. There's always this push pull between the sales team,
Mhm.
of any organization I've ever worked in, and everybody else,
Of
the
course.
production team or whatever. So this was an issue, and they kept thinking they had another consultant who kept wanting to talk to them about how to have more effective meetings between the two departments. And I'm like, this is not about the tactics of a better meeting. The system is broken. You have X amount of salespeople, and only a third of the same of the people that are producing the quotes for these very complex uh, contracts that are going out. Well, the sales guys didn't even know half of what they were selling because it was so complex. They're just trying to close the deal. And then these guys that have to do all the complexity of these very intricate quotes, are like, but there's only three of us and there's, 15 of you. And so that's not about communicate. I mean, not that the tactics aren't important and we couldn't have better meetings and better communication. But the point is the system is not designed for these guys that are a party of three to be effective against 15 hungry sales guys who are calling every 5 minutes wanting their quote yesterday to close a deal. And it's just fascinating to me how common those kinds of things happen where we want to go to, but it's a common, often uh, obvious response because the person who's making those decisions is often at a developmental stage where what they know is tactics.
Yep. Yep.
So they're not thinking big picture. I mean, we're seeing it right now in our government in the United States. I mean, all the chaos is in my opinion, you do not have systems thinkers at the highest level. We're just shooting from the hip. We're doing whatever we need to do, to respond to whatever we think the latest fire is. But there's rippling effects across multiple systems because the government is not a business. It's a network of complex systems, each of which impacts many, many other things. I mean, in business, that can be said as well, but it's less, obviously not as many networks depending on the business and the size. But I think my point is systems impact one another and everything is a system. So everything that happens, particularly in our world now where everything is a global level, uh, the ramifications of every action are just so compounded beyond even our understanding in this moment. And I don't think it's different for us as individuals or companies. It's just a larger scale.
So let's take that on that. Let's shift that to an individual level because I'm a big like personal systems guy. I mean, my the way
Mhm.
I operate, I try to be as systematic as possible, and I try to find those tools and tactics that will fit in with the system of my life for personal development, knowledge, and
Mhm.
then the actual work I have to do. So, how do you start if someone comes to you and says, because and this is a great example since we're on a podcast right now. I think this is one of the things that has been is I think that whenever I like to think that people that listen to my shows, hopefully they find some utility value in it and it's good information. And I try to find and brilliant people like you to bring on to have these kind of conversations. But the trouble is there's just no shortage of tactics. And so you've got people that get so frustrated because they're like, well, I tried to journal for 30 days because so and so told me that would change my life, and my life hasn't changed. I read James Clear's book, Atomic Habits, and I started habit stacking, and it didn't make the difference. There's just so many tactics. So if you had that blank slate, that person that walked into your office, let's say it's a a high performing CEO that's like, you know what? I've nailed all the stuff that we talked about. I make the money, I've got the job, I've got all that, but my home life sucks. It's terrible.
Yeah.
And I'm a systems guy. I buy into what you're saying, Doc. I like the systems. I know that I can't just apply the latest whatever tactics some guest on Tim Ferriss's show told me. I want to go beyond that. I want to create a system based on who I am and the meaning of my life, the meaning of my life is that I am a family man. I'm a devoted husband and father, and I want to maintain health for those reasons. I want to give my children the time and attention they need. How do I start to build a home system that matches my tactics for the best outcomes? I mean, is it
Well, it's a big question. So the process that I use, I can speak to that
okay?
because my work is grounded, as I've already said, in human development, trauma informed, and something called integral theory. So what we look at is we look at the worldview that the individual has now, and that's an intake process that we go through and have the conversation. So I get very clear on this is who you are now as a human being. And then when I'm talking about systems, I'm talking also about the human dynamics of systems, the energy between the players in the system, which is totally different from what I call concrete systems, your marketing systems, your financial systems, those kind of things. Because we get into trouble in the human dynamic piece. The other stuff we pretty much can handle with tactics, and we know how to do that. Then we look at where you want to go and we define a very clear topic. So we're not coaching to goals. We're really coaching to a shift in consciousness, which is a totally different thing. And then I go back and I come up with two avatars or archetypes, whatever we want to call them, for what we call your current way of being. So you can get very grounded in that. We use that language very specifically because we're not saying it's wrong. You've been successful based on this way of being. We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but there's obviously some things that maybe need some work. And then we come up with an archetype for the new way of being. And those are very concrete archetypes so that the person can really start to imagine themselves. Because usually people can't really tell me where they want to go. They just know there's something keeping them somewhere stuck,
Mhm.
you know. And then I develop the program and we look at developmental objectives, not goals, really shifts in developmental based on those early conversations. And we kind of co-create, I bring it back and we co-create a program that we began working from. And then there's a lot of teaching and dynamics between me and the individual. What we start to see is literally a transformation. So the first part is getting really grounded in the current way, what it allows for, what it doesn't allow for, and then start moving into the new way. And excuse me, I'm literally giving that individual practices, things to look at to develop greater awareness. Because we have all these blind spots, even if we're aware, we're not always aware in the moment. We're aware after the fact, after I made a fool of myself again in that meeting with my boss for the 92nd time, you know. So we have practices and things that they're to call attention to that I design and write out literally for the individual. And then they're reporting back to me every week and I'm tweaking it based on what's happening. The growth is huge. I can give a quick example of a gentleman I just completed who the CEO asked me to take him on because he was kind of this cantankerous, difficult guy, brilliant, but everybody had trouble working with him. And once we got into it very quickly, the trauma came out. It was related to a father that was absent and just, he was kind of cast aside in the divorce as a young boy. And there was a lot of anger and pain associated with that. That was now being realized as a 55-year-old man in his daily interactions. And he literally did not realize, he knew people had issues with him, but he did not realize or know that there's another way to communicate and create results. He literally had no concept of that. And then as he started to shift and make those changes and started to see different results and people respond to him differently, he then was struggling with, well, but now I feel like I'm not being true to myself, because he's in between those two ways, right? And I said, no, that's perfectly normal. It's going to take some time for you to fully step into this new way. But now you have a different lens from which to look at your own interactions and you can make different choices in the moment. So that's a simple thing that might happen. But relationships start to change. People start to feel more at peace. They start to see themselves in other potentials. Like this same gentleman did not see himself as a leader, did not feel he could contribute to the company. He was still very much in many ways that young boy that didn't live up to the expectations of the father who was barely around other than here and there to criticize. So that's I think, the joy that I have in doing the work is I can see because of my training and life experience, I can see the potential when people can't see it in themselves. And then I get to hold up that mirror and walk alongside them and help them step into it and realize it. And it's just a joy to see that happen because I feel like when we can make those kinds of shifts, I'm not just impacting this person to be a more effective leader. I'm seeing significant changes in how they show up in the rest of their lives as parents, as spouses, as whatever roles they're in, better children. And it's very gratifying to me because I have great concerns at this point in history about the family structure and how it's deteriorating. So anything that I can do to help people be better in those areas, I feel very privileged to do it. As one of my clients texted me on Father's Day, one of the greatest compliments ever was, "I'm a better dad because of you," and that's everything. I mean, and he was already a great dad as far as I was concerned. But we had conversations about other opportunities, and sometimes busy CEOs, they think, my job is to make sure they get to college and do all the stuff. But no, now your boys are men. They're getting married. They're having children. They need you more than ever. The work is not done. So we're able to have those kinds of conversations and shifts occur, and it's just very, very rewarding.
It's interesting you say that. So, a week from this Saturday, my oldest daughter is getting married, and
Oh,
yeah, and one of the things I mentioned, I'm 51 years old, and the older I get, Dr. Spano, the more the greatest achievement of my life is my daughters. To see them grow into healthy, well-adjusted, beautiful. I mean, I'm going to move the camera for those watching. I keep right there. Those are my girls, and
oh,
barely see. They're kind of blurred out in the background.
yeah,
Kind of
two girls.
two girls, Rylan and Abby, 15 months apart. And the older I get, it's like no matter what else I achieve in life, the fact that those two girls have turned out the way they have, it's like whatever little I had to do with it. And people get upset because they're like, "How did?" And I'm going to brag a little bit, but they'll ask me, "How did Rylan and Abby turn out? How did you do it?" And I was like, "They made it easy. I'm lucky. I had really, really awesome girls. They were the easiest girls to raise." And I'm with you. I say that not so much as a boast, but more of a wish. I mean, my wife and I say this all the time. We're like, we wish so badly that people had the relationship that we have. We're very
Yeah.
intentional with one another, with our own systems and routines. I mean, our marriage, this is going to sound kind of cold, but I think you'll know where I'm coming from because I'll explain a detail of it. We have a very systematic marriage in that we have routines, such as every Sunday morning we drink from the same coffee cups. She and I, we have these cheesy
Mhm.
coffee cups that a friend of hers gave us for our wedding. What that says, "Hubby and Wifey." So it's like it's created this little tradition.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I'll tell you what, Dr. Spano, if I bring the coffee on a Sunday morning in any mug other than one of those, Jimlin's like, "What is this? What are you doing? Did you forget?" I'm like, "Oh
Yeah.
my gosh." Um, and so the older I get, the more I realize, and and it was just by God's grace. I mean, like I I was on a podcast a friend of mine has called The Dad Manual recently, and he was asking me some of these things, and I said, I said, "Man," I said, "one of the things I used to do with Rylan and Abby is I would lie down with each of them separately every single night whenever I would tuck them in." I'll never forget one night lying by Rylan in particular, and I was like, "God, thank you so much for making me aware of how important this is to their development." I mean, I didn't read it in a book, "Go lie down with your children," and stuff.
Right.
I just was, and I felt so lucky. And I can tell you firsthand that by creating those kind of that routine and system at home to about fatherhood, it has paid off such enormous dividends. And so
Yeah.
one final thing, just to kind of wrap a bow on this. So it's kind of funny. One of the things that we did as a routine, which again, I like to think that routines are part of the household system,
Mhm.
is every Father's Day we would watch Father the Bride, the Steve Martin version.
I love that. I love that movie.
Anything Nancy Myers does, I'm in.
Yeah.
And so we would watch that movie every single year. And it was funny because growing up, like Brian McKenzie, Annie's, fiance,
Mhm.
he was 26 in the movie. And I remember starting to watch this movie whenever I was in my 20s, and I would always be like, oh my gosh, I'm almost Brian McKenzie's age, but I'm still younger. Then I'd be like, I'm just a few years older than Brian McKenzie. Now I'm Steve
Yeah.
Martin. And it's like,
Yeah, you're the father of the bride.
I'm the
Yeah.
father of
That's so
Brian.
funny.
It's so bizarre. But I think let's just talk about, like, 'cause I just did it by, again, by God's grace. How do you, what are some things that the dads listening out there, or moms for that matter, that they're
Yeah.
like, man, that would be cool to have some little systems and routine, but to your point, kind of like the CEO, he doesn't want to be like artificial, kind of, counterfeit. That How do they figure out some real tactics and routines to draw their children in? And right now, God, these poor parents. I mean,
It's hard.
we just missed the social media age. I mean, Rylan and Abby are 25 and 26, so they had social media, but I didn't have to compete with screens like these
Right.
parents do today.
Right.
So how did some of these parents start to take a systematic routine, approach to their household to bring their family together? How do they do that?
I think I mean, it's again, it depends on the family, but I think what I'm seeing, let me speak to what concerns me the most around this is people who have spent so much time devoted to the company or the business or their career. And now their kids are teenagers and they're trying to connect with them and it's too late.
Mm,
So we have to remember that the reason we're in business, the reason we're trying to be successful is for most of us anyway, our families. And we don't want to lose our children along the way. I have way too many miles on airplanes that I'll never take back that I missed with being home with my son. And my son's gone now. So that's part of why I'm on this platform about it because you don't know before long they're gone and they're living their own lives and now you're trying to be a part of it and you can't fill in for the years that you were not there. But I think to your point, to me it's more about quality of time than even quantity. When I see parents who are really present with their kids, it doesn't need to be a lot. So I'll give you an example of a father that I was working with where I literally had to write out a practice step by step of how to connect with his daughters. He literally like had no clue how to do it. And so one of the things was you need to get off your phone. Like when you're sitting with him at dinner, you can't, or you're out to dinner, you cannot be on your phone because he was complaining that they're on their phones. Well, yeah, you're all on your phones. So, maybe one of the practices is, no phones during dinner, kind of thing. But then it was so funny because the first night that he did the practice, he said, well, he started talking about, some musician that I didn't know who it was. So I didn't know what to say or how to talk to them about it. So I just got on my phone. Well, I said, that's a missed opportunity because now you ask, well, what is it about this artist that you like so much? Well, let me hear it. Can you pull it up on your phone? I'd like to hear why you like this person or whatever. It's an opportunity to step into their world and what they're interested in. So I think there's a lot of ways to do it, but it's really about intention and knowing that I meaningfully want to connect, with them and be a part of, they reach a point, as you well know, where they don't necessarily want you involved in every aspect of their lives. I was with a friend the other day at a golf tournament that we do in honor of my son every year. We raise money for people with disabilities. And this guy's there. Well, 2 years ago, he was there with this teenager and, dad was everything. Well, I mean, now she's 14 and she's like, Dad, you think you're so cool. You're not. And we're like, no, he really is cool. No, he's not. And it's like a whole different dynamic 2 years later. And he's sitting there like, I don't know when I lost her, but I lost her. And he hasn't. They're a very close family, but it's just, a different dynamic. And I think, it's not easy with the phone situation, but I think I love what you're talking about in terms of practices or systems, not in a rigid way, but being present, because it doesn't take a lot of time to be present if you're doing it. I don't think kids need a lot. They just need to know that you're paying attention to them. I remember my son Michael one time, he used to sit at the kitchen table and he'd read me all the scores because he was a big basketball fan and I was doing dishes and he's reading me the changes and the coaches and I don't even know. And I was tuned out. I'm doing, trying to get lunch for him and dinner, breakfast dishes and I'm answering him and he goes, "Mom, you're blowing me off. This is really important. I need you to hear this." And I was like, he's so new. Like I'm answering him, but I wasn't really tuned in to what he was trying to tell me and how important it was to him that this coach went to another team or whatever the heck it was. So yeah, no pat answers. I think just love them as best you can and be present as best you can. And I think being truthful, being honest with them and open with them. When we fail, say we're sorry, acknowledge when we goofed up.
Yeah, that's one of the things. I just had this conversation recently with someone that I always tried to do with Rylan and Abby is apologize quickly to let them know that
Yeah.
just that not only because they're going to get to like they're I remember one time Rylan, whenever she was really little, she told someone that I was perfect and I had to correct her in a very sweet way. I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so
Yeah.
glad that you think that, but let me tell you, I am so not, darling." And then
Yeah.
because they will get to that age where
Yeah.
they see your imperfections and they can't call
Yeah.
you out on them. And so I think it gives you credibility and builds trust with them when you're willing to say, "Babe, I didn't handle that right. I'm sorry."
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've noticed that in my life. Now, one of the things before we go, if we've got a little bit of time, I do want to turn to, and actually, it's really it's kind of for selfish reasons. I just got some news about a business partner, dear friend. I mean, like a brother to me that is going to be going through some
Mm.
major health issues, and it's gonna, and it's just it was a shock to all of us that are close to him yesterday, and so there's gonna be grief there for his family,
Yeah.
for that person, and using kinda like you were talking about with the executive that comes and wants to make that change, there's a who you are and then the avatar of what you wanna become. I think
Right.
anyone that is about to deal with grief or has been hit with grief, I think the avatar would naturally be, well, I want to be back well adjusted and able to just function. And like some people, it's like, I want to be able to get out of bed again. I want to be able to talk to
Right.
someone without crying. I think to become a Dr. Sharon Spano where they leverage it and deal with it and really make it something great, that would be ideal. But I think a lot of people listening to this that are going through grief, that have gone through grief, they know grief is going to come. They're
Mm.
going to lose a loved one one day. They just want to know, how do I walk through that? We know that there are the stages of grief, but how do you walk through that and come through it without it just completely devastating your life? Can we touch on that real quick?
Well,
Or as much time as you have, I say real quick.
amazing that you asked me that because I just launched a podcast last week,
Oh,
called Beyond the Loss, and it is specific to parents losing a child, but I think that many of the tenets are the same. And what I'm talking a lot about is integration. And integration is about holding, as I've kind of alluded to this, I think earlier, holding space. We talk about it as a non-dual thinking often, holding space for the grief and what is happening or has happened. And then, of course, especially after with the child, what I had to learn to do was to hold space for joy again in my life.
right.
A lot of parents or a lot of people, when you lose someone, we feel like we can't go on, or if it's a spouse, I can't, I feel guilty or I can't be healthy because my spouse is not healthy or whatever. Um, the shift that I had to make was recognizing that my son would not want me mourning for the rest of my life. My son was a very joyful human being and a very kind, gentle man. And I knew he would not want my husband and I to just shrivel up and die. So it takes time, the old saying, but I think the integration of knowing that it's okay to hold space for the reality of what it is now, with whatever's going to come next. And I'm really emphasizing on the show that we're not trying to fix it or heal the grief. We're trying to just say that wherever you are is okay. And you don't have to rush into being something else because everybody around you might, the old, you should be getting over it by now, or you need to clean out his room now, or you need to do this now. there's no now. There's only what you have the bandwidth for, and the time is what it will be when it will be. And to me, for someone who's in that transition period, it's a very sacred time. It's just such a beautiful sacred time. My husband and I take off the day that our son was born, which was last Friday, April 3rd. We go somewhere in nature and we celebrate Michael coming into the world. We do the same thing on the day that he transitioned. We are believers. We have the tradition, so we celebrate that he's now with the Lord. And it's not a fun day for me, but it's a day that I recognize that my son lived this span and he made a huge impact in the time that he was here. He was only here 27 years, but he's still having an impact in the work that I do. And I think if we could kind of embrace that, death is a beautiful completion, as hard as it is for those left behind, as hard as it is maybe for the person, who is suffering, but it's a part of life. And I just, I don't know, I'd like to open up conversations around what it can be beyond just the suffering and the tragedy of it all.
I think that is beautiful, and I got to believe that Michael is incredibly proud. And the beautiful thing about meeting a fellow believer is the knowledge that we have that whenever we pray, "Thy kingdom come, Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven," that we know that Michael is in perfect health right now for
Right.
eternity.
Right.
And so April 3rd, I will. That'll be a very special day. In
It
my
was a
memory.
beautiful day. We had a beautiful day. We went to the beach where he grew up. We spent family vacations there, Easters, for years, his Easter egg hunts as a little boy. And we hadn't been back there, and it was a little hard to leave. My husband got very choked up,
Sure.
but it was just being in that space and remembering. I couldn't do that years ago. I couldn't be anywhere that we had been with him for many, many years. It was too hard. But now, 18 years later, he died in '08. So I'm able, again, to hold space for all of it. And it's a very peaceful place to be. So I'll have your friend in thought and prayer, and the family and all of you around him, because I know it's not easy. My son suffered for 4 years before he died. It's a very hard thing to go through. But those last days and weeks, we tried to make them as special and calm and peaceful and holy as we could. I didn't want a lot of drama. I come from a family of wailers and, a lot of drama at the end. I didn't want that. And so we kept it as sacred as we possibly could. It was a very peaceful transition.
Well, I'm so glad to learn that. And Dr. Spano, this has been an amazing conversation. And like I told you before you got on, I want to make sure though that people know how to get in touch with you if they've heard something that resonated with them and would like to learn more about your work, your books, anything. How do they follow you? How do they stay in touch with you? And then anything that we didn't cover that we
Sure.
should have, the floor is yours.
Well, I appreciate it. I want to make the Leader's Edge that I mentioned. We have that on the website for free. And we will have a special page for your podcast. So it'll be SharonSpano.com/appearance/ the healthy CEO or the Jason Wright show. We'll have both on there because I know you have two shows, and anyone can go on there and take the assessment. And then Beyond the Loss with the subtitle Life and Identity After a Child Dies. That'll start being more visible. I've only done 2 shows so far. I'm on YouTube as well. If anyone is in that place and maybe interested in being on the show, certainly they can apply through my website, which is SharonSpano.com. But always my email, it's just my name, Sharon@SharonSpano.com. If they want to set up a time or, obviously have a calendar link and all those things. I'm all over social media and just here to really serve in the best possible way that I can. The Beyond the Loss podcast, my other podcast, we shut that down because I don't have the bandwidth you do to have 2 of them going. But I feel I wanted to do this for a long time, and the time is now. I felt like kept waiting until I had the time, and I had another podcast that I had in mind, and you'll appreciate this as a believer. December 31st, I woke up and literally the Lord said to me, "It's the wrong podcast." And I was like, "What? Or what?" I'd spent 3 months preparing for the transition. We had everything done, but I was procrastinating and I couldn't figure out why. And 31st, and I got up and I got on Chat GPT and I just started exploring. And I am very, very excited to address and hopefully serve families in a different way around loss. Because if you think about it, there is no, Jason, there is no word in the English language for a parent who's lost a child.
No, no, that's
There's a
crazy.
word
Wow.
in it, and that tells you a lot about how we, as a culture, as a society, shun away from that horrific type of loss because it's unnatural. It disrupts the family order in a way no other loss does. And so, I just want to have the conversation and see where it goes. We'll see what happens.
Well, and I'm also a big believer in divine appointments, and it's something that we haven't even discussed is my wife and I own probably the largest children's boutique in Texas, and definitely and it's her business. She's built it by her own blood, sweat, and tears, and so this is something we confront, unfortunately, frequently. I mean, when you own a children's store
Mhm.
and you deal with thousands of parents and families, this is something. So I will absolutely make sure that your show gets plugged into our Hot Tots. That's the name of the store, the Hot Tots Network, which has an incredible following of moms and dads and grandmas as well. But Jimlin is basically like this surrogate mother to babies from all over, and so I think that I'm so glad that we've connected because we, as a great example. Being in Texas, we have a lot of parents that have children that go to Camp Mystic. So that was very real for us whenever that tragedy
Mhm.
happened. And we had parents that came into the store that had friends that lost children. We had friends that were, you know, praising because their children were rescued. So and then there's just so that we will definitely plug in there and see how we can use that as a way to support the show and just and to support these families that go through this because we do see it. So
Yeah,
that's pretty
yeah. Well,
cool.
I thank you for that. We're hoping to have a different conversation. I'm being very clear that it's not for the acute early
Yeah,
periods of loss because I think you need more than a podcast for that.
yeah.
But I want to have we're talking about the long after, the transition after the integration. How do you reclaim your life? How do you reclaim joy in your life? How do you have meaning and keep your child's memory alive? And there's lots of different ways that families are doing that. So I thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about it today. And I've enjoyed our conversation. I appreciate being on the show so much. And look, I love the work you're doing.
Thank you, Dr. Spano. You're welcome back anytime. Folks, thanks so much for listening. She's Dr. Sharon Spano. I'm Jason. We're out.